We continue our study on insecurity today. We're talking about Leah in the Bible, and she battled with insecurity. We saw the foundations of insecurity in her life. She lived in fear of abandonment and never being accepted. She lived with this unnecessary pressure to perform. And then people that feel that always live in insecurity. The third thing that we could talk about today that brings insecurity, a foundation for it, is comparison. Leah's dad had to trick Jacob into marrying her. She wasn't as beautiful as Rachel. She wasn't as desired as Rachel. But my friend, 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse number 12 says, we dare not compare ourselves with others. God made us the way that he did, and he did not make a mistake. So Leah had that first son and said, see, a son. But Jacob didn't change towards her. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 29 and verse number 33, she had a second son. His name would be Simeon. Because notice what it says in verse 33. I'll read it to you in Genesis chapter number 29. It says this. It says, and she conceived again and bare a son and said, because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, he therefore given me this son also, and called his name Simeon. She called him Simeon, and notice that she said, the Lord knows I'm hated. She felt hated. Rachel hadn't had any children yet, so surely now Jacob would be attached to her. And that's what the name Levi means, attached. But things didn't change. Leah felt as if she was still hated, and Jacob didn't love her. A fourth thing that can cause and be a foundation for insecurity is experiencing loss. When we lose something or someone that's precious to us, insecurity will begin to set in. Perhaps we lost a possession or a position or a person or a purpose. Stop and consider when Jacob lost Rachel, he began to cling to Joseph. When he lost Joseph, he began to cling to Benjamin. The fact is this, and by the way, Jacob never did anything profitable with his life in those years. Read it for yourself. The fact is, all temporal things are just that. Temporal. You will lose them at some point. And when our security is based upon temporal things, we begin to live an insecure life. Our security must be based upon and founded upon something that you cannot lose. Such as what? Your relationship with God, your salvation, what you do for eternity's value. Lay up for yourself treasures where moth and dust doth not corrupt, or thieves cannot break through and steal and destroy. When we live our life based upon the foundation of things that are eternal, security begins to set in. When we live for things that are temporal, insecurity. You get that phone call from the doctor, insecurity. You lose your health. You get that call from your boss or your workplace, you're being laid off, insecurity. You lose your job. The fact is this, when we base our security upon temporal things, it never works. So you see that there are foundations for insecurity, but now I want us to consider the consequences of insecurity. The consequences. In Romans chapter number 8 and verse number 31 and 34, it talks about security. Let me read these verses to you real quick in Romans chapter number 8 and in verse number 31 to 34. It says this. It says this. It says, what shall we say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifieth. Who is he that condemneth? It is Christ that died and ever lives to make intercession for us. It goes on to say, what can separate us from the love of God? Nothing. We're more than conquerors through him. What's the point, Pastor? It's this, that when we lay our security at the feet of Jesus, it's going to be okay. But when we don't, we set it upon temporal things, there are consequences. We'll consider those tomorrow.